The Toyota Prius has been around since 2012, and for those of us who live in the UK, you'll very much be accustomed to it because it's often picked by taxi drivers because of the overall driving comfort, the amount of spaciousness that you get within the cabin, and of course the overall fuel efficiency. This is also due to the overall hybrid powertrain that Toyota offers. And speaking of which, across Europe and in the UK, the third generation model which we have on review is solely available as a plug-in hybrid. Now, it is actually more expensive than the older generation model because prices start from roughly £38,000, that is for the design trim, and extend up to roughly £40,000 for the XL trim without adding any additional options. Now, you do also have a warranty that goes up to 10 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first, which is actually very much appreciated. Now, in this video, which will be covered in such a format, I'll be covering everything you need to know about the new generation model, which in my opinion does very much look the part in comparison to the outgoing model, and of course seeing if it's actually worth its price tag. Now, I would like to point out that if you do want to find some of the best deals for this vehicle, make sure you check out the links down in the description below or the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. So let's kick things off and talk about one of the key selling points of the Toyota Prius, and that is of course fuel efficiency. And the new generation model has got a larger 13.6 kilowatt hour battery pack, and that gives it an EV range of roughly 44 to 53 miles. In case you're wondering in terms of why there's a range difference, that's depending on the wheels that you go for. 17-inch will give you better range, while 19-inch will give you a better look, but therefore decrease the overall EV range that you'll be able to attain. Important to know because in the XL trim, as standard, you've got the larger wheels, and therefore you'll have to go for the optional 17-inch wheels to get that better range. Now, in terms of my own tested electric range, I got roughly 40 to 45 miles, which isn't too shabby, and therefore is actually a little bit better than some of its key competitors that sit at roughly the 35-mile mark. Now, you have also got a 40-litre petrol tank that, when combined with its EV portion, will give you roughly 500 to 600 miles of driving range, therefore making it very handy if for some reason you're not going to stop for a break, which is definitely not recommended. Now, in terms of the MPG figures that are claimed by the manufacturer, they sit at a staggering 403 to 565 MPG, which is quite preposterous to say the least. Toyota isn't the only manufacturer to give you wild claims, but thankfully you've got testers like myself to actually put it in real-world scenarios. And from my own tested figure, in terms of MPG, I got a staggeringly high 80 to 85 MPG. Now, that's actually considering that there was some EV range and then it was also depleted. If I was purely running on the EV range with a little bit of petrol power tickled in, then I was hitting over 100 to 120 MPG, which is absolutely obscene. Now, while the EV range was completely depleted and it was pretty much reserved on the reserve battery and therefore using the vehicle's system to constantly recharge it, I was still hitting north of 70 to 75 MPG on the motorway. Now, to put it into perspective, that's far better than a lot of its competitors. In fact, every single hybrid vehicle that I've tested to date gets completely dethroned by the Toyota Prius. Yes, indeed, it is the fuel efficiency king, and what Toyota have been able to achieve with its hybrid system is an absolute work of art. Now, indeed, if you're looking for a hybrid vehicle and want that fantastic fuel efficiency, the Toyota Prius should be at the top of your list. Now, one thing I'm not too fond of, however, especially in comparison to some of its competitors, is the way that you customize the regenerative braking feel, because it's not really intuitive. Now, right now I'm in D mode, and if I were to lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will automatically decelerate where it feels it needs to. Now, you have got, however, a B mode, which can be actuated by shifting down on the gear selector. And if I were to lift off the accelerator pedal, the vehicle will decelerate pretty harshly, although won't come to a complete standstill, unlike some fully electric vehicles and certain hybrid vehicles out there on the market. Now, if you do want to customize the B mode feel, you have to faff around with the driver's display. Let me demonstrate. I press a button on the steering wheel, go down to the appropriate settings while trying to keep my eyes planted on the road, then go all the way to the right, or for example left if you want a shortcut, and then I hold down the button to go into vehicle settings, and then down over here there's regenerative brake. Now here, I can't actually customize it because I'm on the move. So I'm going to come to a complete standstill while I'm on a country road, and yes, it's pretty safe to do. And here I can customize the regen braking feel. Why on earth is the deceleration level not customization on the fly, and why is it such a faff to do while you're driving? I have no idea. This is something I really hope that Toyota can address, potentially via future firmware updates, or indeed in the later generation models of the Toyota Prius. Effectively, what I'm trying to say over here is that the regenerative braking feel is certainly appreciated and will add to the overall efficiency because it recoups energy back into the battery pack and therefore adds to the overall EV driving range and overall fuel efficiency, namely when you're driving in and around town. But the customization option and also the kind of lack of it while you're driving is certainly very cumbersome. Now, another thing that I do find quite disappointing is the fact that you've got a 3.5 kilowatt onboard charger, which is actually really poor in comparison to the vast majority of other plug-in hybrids on the market, and therefore means that using its Type 2 port, it'll go from 0 to 100% in a whopping 4 hours. Not quite good if you're going to be regularly recharging the vehicle, but of course it will be a non-issue if you're going to be doing small commutes and therefore plugging it in at home or at work. Now, on the other hand, what I do rate is the overall driving comfort, because here at the front you've got a MacPherson strut setup, while at the rear you've got a trailing arm double wishbone configuration. The combination yields for a pretty comfortable experience. When it comes to pottering around town, it soaked up a lot of those anomalies, speed bumps and potholes, and when it came to chucking around winding country routes, it did actually hold its own by not providing too much body lean. Make no mistake, it's not going to compete with a sportier vehicle, and equally those with a more advanced or adaptive air suspension system will provide a bit more of a floaty-like driving experience. Now, in terms of its overall driving dynamics, I was actually left pretty jaw-dropped, and given it's a Toyota Prius, one might have not expected it to actually do as well around more challenging routes. But pop it on terms of its sport mode preset, and you can really feel the road under you. You have got a good sort of connection with the steering wheel and therefore the front axle, and therefore means that it feels actually pretty planted on the ground. I think this is in part thanks to the fact of its new aerodynamic design, which has got that slender profile, and therefore feels pretty planted, as I did mention before. Frankly, over here, its front-wheel drive configuration did yield for a really pleasurable experience, and it actually had no problems whatsoever when it came to the overall level of traction either. I didn't have any sort of wheel spin or any sort of torque steer to report. Now, this does actually bring me onto its ECVT transmission, which can actually be heard when you're putting your foot down to the metal, because the engine kind of roars into life. Not something I suspect most people are going to be doing while sat in a Toyota Prius, but just something I thought I should highlight. Namely because if you compare and contrasting it with some of its competitors, which just feel a little bit quieter. Here it is of course worth mentioning that due to its transmission, it means that you've got no ability to change the gears on the fly. No surprise given the older generation Toyota Prius as well, but just something I thought I should re-emphasize in this video. Now, in terms of the switch between EV and petrol power, it's done absolutely seamlessly. You won't hear it or feel it. Indeed, of course, unless you're going to putting your foot down to the metal, the engine kind of trickles away at the front, and it's actually done pretty well to say the least. Now, elsewhere, when it comes to the overall performance, you've got a 2-litre inline 4-cylinder petrol engine, and this combines with an electric motor to dispatch all the power to the front wheels. Here you have got 217 horsepower or 164 kilowatts and 208 newton meters of torque. I actually had it tested using RaceLogic's Performance Box Touch from 0 to 20 miles an hour in 2.03 seconds, 0 to 30 miles an hour in 3.01 seconds, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 6.48 seconds, which is pretty much bang on the manufacturer's claim of 6.8 seconds to 0 to 62 miles an hour, and then 50 to 70 miles an hour to 2.95 seconds. And that's quite handy if you're going to be doing an overtake maneuver on the motorway. As for the peak acceleration, I recorded 0.47 Gs. As for its max speed, it's limited to 110 miles an hour, which will certainly suffice for the vast majority of consumers, but might be disheartening for those who live near unrestricted roads. And in case you're wondering, in pure EV mode, the max speed is limited to 84 miles an hour. So next up we get onto its interior design, and in comparison to some of its competitors, it doesn't very much look overly special. In fact, here some people might feel that it's a little bit outdated. Although I've got no real complaints, you've got a good use of materials around the cabin. And furthermore, it's actually still very practical. While you will find a complete flurry of physical buttons on the steering wheel, they're all the right controls that you'll require. You've got traditional stalks, and you've also got dedicated climate control settings. And yes, they're all physical buttons yet again, with a small little display showing you what you're actually changing, all of which adds to your overall practicality while you're on the move. I would also like to mention, however, you have got a electronic gear selector, and while it does take a little bit of getting used to, namely if you're going between D and B mode, you will actually get used to it after a little while. Now, in terms of the use of technology, you have got a landscape 12.3-inch display that's planted at the center of the dashboard. Here, the screen itself is very vivid, fluid, and also intuitively laid out. It also supports Android Auto and Apple CarPlay over a wired transmission. Although here, if you have got an Apple device, it will also be supported over a wireless transmission. No idea why in this day and age, Android Auto is not also supported over wireless, although this can hopefully be addressed via future firmware updates. Now, what is good to see, however, is that turn-based navigation data is fed through to the fully digitalized 7-inch display. And this will also provide you all the key driving information that you require, such as your traversing speeds and the safety systems that are in operation. Now, on that note, I would just like to point out that the driver's display sits somewhat in between where the regular instrument cluster would be and also a projected head-up display. Somewhat of an in-betweener. Now, that's not exactly a bad thing. However, it does mean that it does obscure some of your frontal vision, and also depending on how you're sat and where your steering wheel is positioned, it means that you might not be able to see all the key information that you require, which I do think is a slight oversight by the manufacturer. Now, aside from that, I also would like to highlight that you have got a standard 6-speaker setup across the Toyota Prius range, at least at the time of filming and in the UK. I do think it's perfectly sufficient for basic music listening, and it very much has a very boomy sound, so therefore you might want to reduce the bass EQ via the settings that can be found via the infotainment system. In fact, if you want a detailed breakdown of the audio system and also my in-cabin measurements, make sure you check out my detailed audio review that can be found up on your pop-up banner or by following the links down in the description below or the pinned comments. Now, this does bring me onto storage, and at the front of the center console you've got an area, although it's not quite large enough to have a larger size smartphone which is plugged into the infotainment system and therefore will be lopsided. Underneath, however, you've got a hashtag hidden compartment. Not my words, but Toyota's. I'm not really sure who they're aiming this towards, but maybe the Gen Z will appreciate it. Then you've also got 2 USB Type-C ports, one of which is used to connect up to the infotainment system, and a 12-volt socket, which can be handy for plugging in a dash cam. Further down, you've got 2 cup holders, and you've also got a hashtag wireless charger that is found here. This is actually quite handy, other than the silly hashtag name that's been used, because it will fit larger size smartphones and also ones that actually have a case on them. So good thinking by the manufacturer. Then you've also got a pretty large area that's found underneath the center armrest, and here you'll find a further 2 USB Type-C ports. There is also 2 USB Type-C ports that are found towards the rear of the center console, which are also used to deliver charge for your rear occupants. Aside from all of this, you have of course got the glove box, which has been optimized for right-hand drive vehicles, and then you've also got the front door bins, which are large enough to accommodate a 500ml bottle alongside some small to medium-sized valuables. Although it's a shame over here not to see any sort of fabric lining or non-slip material, which means your loose change or keys will be heard rattling about. The same could be said for the rear door bins as well, which are unsurprisingly a little bit more limited. But you do have a pull-down armrest compartment, which reveals 2 cup holders. Now, aside from storage within the cabin, we have to of course talk about its boot capacity, and here it's actually quite limited in comparison to its main competitors, because you've got 284 litres to play around with only, which is actually quite disappointing. And this is just due to the overall design of the vehicle, and therefore means it's a little bit less practical than even the older generation model. You can of course drop down the seats, but a total figure has not been shared by the manufacturer. I'd estimate it to be roughly 1,100 to 1,300 litres, and therefore will suffice for taking larger luggage. Now, it's also pretty practical thanks to the fact that you've got a hatchback design and a wide opening with the tailgate. And you've also got a power tailgate that comes fitted in the XL trim as well. No option to add it in the entry-level design trim, just in case you're wondering. Now, there is, disappointingly, a 60/40 rear split folding design only, and indeed you've not got an integrated ski latch or a 40/20/40 rear split folding design like you'd find on some rival alternatives. Equally over here, the underfloor compartment is actually pretty limited and doesn't actually look the part, which is something that I've never said before, but it has got this white polyester look, which just looks pretty cheap and tacky. Here, it is more important to know that your charging cables won't be able to be fit over here, and therefore means that you're going to have to lug around an additional cable bag as well, which is going to eat up in terms of your overall storage space that you've got. Now, aside from all of this, it is actually quite surprising that you've got no towing capacity at all. Indeed, it is not actually permitted, at least according to Toyota's press material. And that indeed might put off certain individuals as well from buying this vehicle, namely if you're going to be going camping or indeed taking something on longer journeys. Now, seating comfort isn't exactly its forte either, because first off, in terms of the use of materials, you have got a black fabric, which is pictured in the design trim, or synthetic leather in the incl, which will certainly be an upgrade, but doesn't exactly feel all that premium in comparison to some of its competitors. It's equally disappointing to see manually adjustable seats with an electric lumbar in the design trim. If, however, you want 8-way power adjustable seats, memory function, heated and ventilated front seats, you'll have to go for the XL trim, which is actually quite disheartening. Now, furthermore, what's even more important is the fact that headroom at the back is actually pretty limited. Indeed, it's actually been compromised just due to the exterior shell of the vehicle, and therefore that sloped roofline does affect the overall headroom that you're going to get at the back, which is the same that could be said about the vast majority of its competitors and equally its predecessor. Now, legroom isn't too bad, namely due to the fact that you can stretch out your legs due to the manufacturer optimizing the transmission tunnel and therefore keeping it almost flat. But it is worth mentioning that the seats are somewhat angled and therefore means that they will give certain pressure on your quad muscles, making it a little bit more uncomfortable on those longer journeys. Now, despite its shortcomings, namely in comparison to the older generation model, the new Prius very much does look the part. And indeed, I could see myself owning it, and indeed a lot of people actually loving the look of it. Asking a few friends and family, they very much were surprised to see it was called a Toyota Prius rather than something a little bit more exotic. At the front, you've got a pretty accentuated design, which is thanks to the fact that you have got this kind of sloped bonnet, which feeds into the headlights. Then towards the side, you've got a nice silhouette. And here you've got 17-inch alloys in the design, or 19-inch in the XL, with optional 17-inch alloys, which are also available. Then at the rear, you've got a really kind of modern look, and this has also got certain nods to the older generation Toyota Prius and also other models within the Toyota lineup. Frankly, when it comes to the exterior design, I love what the manufacturers achieved with the new model. Now, moving on from its exterior design, we get on to safety. And here, the older generation model was tested in 2016 by Euro NCAP and was awarded a full 5 out of 5 stars, doing a particularly good job in adult occupancy tests. However, the new generation model has not been tested, at least not at the time of filming, although one might expect it to perform similarly. Now, in terms of the driver assistance system, you've got a plethora of them that come included as standard across the entire trim range. Now, bear with me. You've got full range adaptive and dynamic radar cruise control, which does actually work a treat on the motorway by keeping you at a safe distance from the leading vehicle and not feeling jerky either. Lane tracing assist, that gives you steering support, which is very much appreciated, and also gives you certain controls via the driver's display in terms of adjusting the turn speed as well. You've got lane departure alert with steering control, lane change assist, which will work on and off on certain instances, road side assist, pre-collision system, overtake prevention support, turn signal link control, proactive driving assist, emergency steering assist, driving monitoring camera, and also a blind spot monitoring system. As a reminder, these all come included as standard, which is absolutely excellent. Now, while these systems in most cases are very much appreciated, it is worth pointing out that they will become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle, no matter your last used setting. And indeed, they're quite a faff to disable because you have to go around the driver's display. See, unlike its competitors that offer shortcuts on the steering wheel, or for example the stalks, or even a certain menu system via the infotainment system, this actually becomes a little bit more cumbersome. And as I demonstrated before, when it comes to adjusting the regenerative braking feel on the move, you'll actually have to come to a complete standstill to disable some of the systems. For example, the driver monitoring system will often pick up incorrectly that my face wasn't recognized while I was driving. And that's just due to how I was placing my hands on the steering wheel, where the steering wheel was positioned, and also how I'm seated within the car. a real annoyance because it kept coming up as a warning on my instrument cluster. And that to me really just drove me up the wall. So every single time I sat inside the vehicle, I actually had to disable all these systems before setting off. And I just really hope that Toyota will actually listen to feedback from its customers and reviewers like myself in order to provide a little bit more of a less cumbersome approach to disable some of these driver assistance systems. Now to conclude, I would like to talk about parking, and here maneuverability is a breeze, not only because you have got a light steering wheel feel, but also a tight turning circle. Do bear in mind what I did mention before in terms of its gear selector, as it does take a little bit of getting used to, between going from R to D or B mode. In terms of visibility at the front, it's actually pretty good, very easy to peer over the bonnet. And furthermore, I actually love the fact that the rear view mirror is actually pretty customizable, in that in terms of its location can be moved just due to a pivot point. And yes, it can also be angled as well. Then you've also got pretty nice opening side windows, although the A-pillars are relatively chunky and somewhat elongated. So therefore, when you're going around corners, sometimes you have to check around it. As for the rear, it can be a little bit limited just due to the sloped headline. And you've also got no rear wiper either, which can be a little bit cumbersome if you're going to be traversing on muddier terrain. Thankfully, however, you've got front and rear parking sensors and also a rear view camera that also has a washer jet, therefore meaning that it can be cleaned. Then you've also got front and rear cross traffic alert, which also gives you an extra bit of peace of mind when it comes to reversing or indeed going out of a parking space. So with all that in mind, it brings us on to a verdict of the new Toyota Prius. And make no mistake, it's not perfect. So here, if you do want to adjust the regenerative braking feel on the fly, you have to faff around with the driver's display. The same could be said about the driver assistance systems, which become re-enabled every single time you power on the vehicle. And that to me is quite cumbersome. Then you've also got limited headroom and legroom around the cabin, and this will certainly be of interest and importance for taxi drivers. Then the same could be said about its overall boot capacity, and the fact you've got no towing capacity gives it a little bit of a disadvantage in comparison to some of its nearest competitors. With that said, I still do think it's a fantastic hybrid that you should certainly consider. Indeed, over here, while it is a little bit more expensive in comparison to the outgoing model, you are getting fantastic and class-leading fuel efficiency, far surpassing any of its competitors and putting all of the vehicles that I've currently tested in the hybrid market to shame, be it in terms of estates, SUVs, hatchbacks or saloons. Indeed, this vehicle is very fuel efficient, and you can see why it was previously used by taxi drivers. Furthermore, you're also getting a nice sleek exterior design, which in my opinion really does look the part and gives it a far better stance on the road. Then you've also got good driving dynamics, comfort and overall performance thanks to the new 2-litre engine. Now combining all of this, I can definitely see myself recommending it, and as such it gets our Best Buy awards. Now I'd be curious to know down in the comment section below if you would pick the 3rd generation Prius over some of its competitors, and namely if you have the older generation Prius, what do you make of it? Now if you want to find some of the best deals for this vehicle, make sure you check out the links down in the description below or the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code that can be found on your screen. Now if you've enjoyed this detailed independent review, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV, and I'll hopefully see you next one. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye.